Let me show you what you need to know to harvest your cut flows like a pro. In today's video, I'll show you 5 tips which I collected over time for really simple harvest practices for maximum vase life in the end. I'm Steffi, I'm a home gardener here in Attleboro, Massachusetts, Zone 6. And as you can tell, cut flows are my passion, so I'm happy to take you here along for the ride and welcome to my channel. Let's talk about the first tip. It's to pick the right harvest time. As you can tell here in this beautiful diffused light, we're out here very early in the morning. I'm not going into details on how early it is right now, but it is important to pick the right harvest time, and I'll usually pick the mornings because the plants are rejuvenated from their nice sleep and night rest overnight, but also the temperatures are still low, so it's a good time to cut your flowers. You could also cut them in the evenings, but I always found that they are oftentimes like tired from the day, especially when it was hot outside. So I always go out in the mornings to cut my flowers. Never go and cut them throughout the day. They will like flop and go wonky most of the time. So that is what I never do, going outside during the day to cut them, either the morning or the evenings. But I would say 95% for me, it's the mornings. It's also easier when you're an early bird. And if you're curious to learn how I started all of those beauties from seed and how I plant my cut flower garden, check out my cut flower garden series here in the link. So let's talk a little bit of equipment. That is tip 2, to have like some good buckets. And as per usual, I'll put everything below in the descriptions, but I have some buckets here which are typically deep. I'll make sure they're clean with clean water, because that's really important to put your flowers immediately into a bucket of water and not running around with them just cut up. I have 2 types of buckets. This is the gardener's supply bucket. At the moment, only 2 of those ones are working instead of the 4 because I left it out in the winter. So it's my fault, not that product's fault. But the bottom exploded when it was ice. What is also really helpful with those buckets is to look for buckets which are tall and deep, because if they're wide, like the flowers can like sink into the water or not structure well, or you need like some sort of a grid to make them stay into the bucket properly. So I have always buckets which are a little bit smaller on the top, so the flower heads are not getting messed up. And then the other really important thing is, and you've seen it probably if you're following me already for a while, is the sanitation bucket. So we have 1 glass with bleach solution, 1 glass with Dawn dish soap solution. And every time when I cut a flower, I dip it in the bleach, dip it in the soap, and carry on between plants. Not necessarily when I take multiple cuts from one plant, but between each and every plant, I'll dip them into the water to make sure that I'm not transferring anything between the plants which could cause trouble. Because remember, the human is the biggest disease factor in the garden. So make sure you have clean shears and clean equipment to work with. So this is typically my setup. Clean water buckets, multiple typically if I go through the full garden. My sanitation bucket for the cuts and cleaning the shears in between. And then I have always a debris bucket with me to go ahead if there are any like blooms which needs to be cut off and deadheaded. I usually do that at the same time. That's just more efficient than going through it multiple times, I feel, because you go and look for nice blooms already and then you see the ones which are faded. It's the easiest way to cut them out, because that is really important with a cut flower garden to keep the production going, that you keep cutting. One thing which feels also counterintuitive is where to cut for stems. You cut for stems where you want to have a certain stem length. Yes, this means sometimes you have to sacrifice a couple of blooms, but they will grow back, and they will grow back in the multitude. So don't be scared to lose like 2 for the 1 bloom which you want to get. That is very normal. That is also very normal for the dahlias, because if I would have cut it just here, I would have had just a very, very short stem, and now I have a nicer stem length. And that is also why you have the debris bucket. There you go. The other thing which is always important is to take the lower leaves off. Any debris which you have later on in the water will just make the water go bad very, very quickly and just create bacteria, which you don't want, because that all limits your vase life in the end. last but not least, the more you cut, the more you get. That is true for every cut flower, which is a multi-stem cut flower, and not for the one which is a single stem like most sunflowers or so. But for zinnias, dahlias, basil, any type of filler plants, even snapdragons, they come back hard once you cut the flowers. Because why is that? A flower or a plant wants to reproduce, and the bloom is the first step for reproduction to produce seeds. And if you cut the plant head off or the bloom off, this is when it signals, oh shoot, I gotta reproduce more blooms to ensure that I will live on. So that's the reason why we cut a lot and get a lot of blooms. And again, don't be shy to cut off side shoots. They will come back with a vengeance, I'll promise. So after every equal harvest, you should have one beautiful bucket and probably an equal bucket with cutoffs. That's at least how I roll here and how it happens with me here. So don't be shy. That is all for the greater good of keeping the cut flower production going. So I hope this video was helpful for you. It took me a while to gather up all of those tips over a few seasons to really be efficient with my harvest for maximum vase life, to really take the best out of the flowers and make them last the longest. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Enjoyed looking at my buckets of happiness, how I call them. And let me know if you have any questions in the comments. You know, I love to chat with you in the comments. Otherwise, subscribe and watch another video. Thank you.